Yep, you can go ahead.
Good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to the House Manufacturing Caucus session focused on the competitiveness of U.S. manufacturing. My name is Jason Phillips. I'm a partner at McKinsey & Company, and I come to this topic of manufacturing competitiveness from a very personal place. I actually grew up in upstate New York in a city called Jamestown that used to be renowned for its manufacturing prowess, a city in Congressman Reed's district, in fact, and subsequently ran a manufacturing company for the better part of the decade before I joined McKinsey. So today I'm spending essentially all of my time working with mid-sized industrial companies to drive their competitiveness, and doing that together with the private equity investors who are bringing to these companies capital, as well as the conviction that they can compete locally, nationally, and globally. What's really exciting to me about this work is with a relatively straightforward toolkit of processes, tools, and capabilities, we're unable to unlock some real potential in these businesses, a potential that allows them to add jobs and to strengthen their communities. So I think the opportunity to drive competitiveness in U.S. manufacturing is both real as well as necessary. And our hope is that in some of the research that we've brought today and we'll be sharing with you, you can find a common fact base as well as insights that you can use to inform your discussions and debates and decisions around crafting policy to enable and unlock this growth. So today I've got the pleasure of introducing two of my partners who are co-authors of this work. Katy George is a senior partner at McKinsey, who is the global co-head of our operations practice, where she focuses on manufacturing and supply chain. Katy also serves on our Shareholders Council, which is the governance body overseeing all of McKinsey. And Sree Ramaswamy is a McKinsey Global Institute partner, and he leads our work on the U.S. manufacturing and global economic competitiveness. So I will hand it over to Katy.
Great. Thanks very much for having us. We're really delighted to share some of the findings of our research. This has been a multi-year collaboration really between two parts of McKinsey. So I represent the part of McKinsey that most of you could think about, it's just our client service organization. Our operations practice is about a third of what we do at McKinsey, so it's quite large, larger than our strategy practice now. And we work with companies in all different industries and all over the world, helping to improve their performance around manufacturing, supply chain, sourcing, product development, and service operations, so the kind of whole gamut. And so we've come together with Sree and the McKinsey Global Institute team to really develop perspectives on what it will take for the U.S. to become, once again, truly competitive in the global manufacturing sphere. And as I said, we've been working on different chapters of this over multiple years. The McKinsey Global Institute is an independent think tank, mostly economists like Sree and others. It is funded by McKinsey, by the McKinsey Partnership, so it is independent, it's nonpartisan, and what we pride ourselves on is that we're able to bring together kind of the macro perspectives by taking a global macroeconomic view of issues with micro perspectives that are informed by our client work day to day with individual companies. We don't do policy work, so we won't weigh in on policy debates, but we try to bring together a fact base and a synthesis around what's happening, what the gaps are relative to people's aspirations around performance, and what some of the levers might be and how valuable some of those levers might be in terms of changing outcomes. So Sree will jump in, and we'd love to have this be an interactive conversation, so please jump in and ask questions anytime.
Okay. Thanks, folks, and Jason, thank you for inviting us. We've been, as Katy said, we've been doing this for a number of years, and at this point, honestly, I will speak to whoever is willing to listen on what's going on here. I would suggest, by the way, for folks, you may want to try to move to this side, just because there's a bunch of slides up here, unless you can see well, because there is a quiz at the end. So, the way we do our research at the McKinsey Global Institute is we combine the economic data that academics, economists typically use, publicly available data, with the insights that we get from the companies that McKinsey serves. So even though we're independent, we're funded independently, we still talk to our colleagues. So Katy and I, we do collaborate, and so we learn from Katy and folks like her what these companies are seeing, right? And that allows us to add some color to the numbers that people crunch out and use charts to crunch out. That's really what I want to talk about here a little bit. And so, this is kind of a famous chart. This is typically how everybody starts a conversation about US manufacturing. This is the chart that shows what's happened to manufacturing employment, right? And this goes back to 1945, and you can basically see that for the longest time we had 17, 18 million jobs, 78 million people employed in manufacturing, and then people say starting in 2000, actually started in the late 90s, and it's important to make that distinction. Our net employment started to fall, and it kind of fell off a cliff in the 2000s. It's come back a little bit, but we've had a little bit more than 1 million jobs or so over the last 7 or 8 years. A lot of people think this is reshoring. It's not reshoring. It's just basically, there's a bunch of production of automobiles because you had a cyclical rebound. You had a lot of oil and gas activity, which has ticked up again in the last year or so. And that's driving production of things like metals and machinery, sort of associated supply chain components that drives all of that. It kind of supplies those industries. That's really what's been going on there. If you take a longer term perspective, though, and you look at the output in US manufacturing, one of the things we often hear when we go on and talk to people is manufacturing is actually doing perfectly fine. Right? Output is really solid. We're doing really well. We're not really sure what the problem is. So this is one way to think about what the problem is. And so what we found is there's actually two different manufacturing sectors in the US. And they show up in a couple of different ways. This is one way in which they show up. So if you look at the orange line, this is the total real output in manufacturing. So the value-added output in US manufacturing, going back to 1980. And you look at that orange line and you say, this cycle looks pretty good. Okay, the last decade or so has been a little bit shaky, but by and large it looks really good. And then you take from that orange line, you take away two industries. You take away computers and electronics manufacturing, and you take away pharmaceuticals manufacturing. Those are not industries you typically think about when you think about manufacturing. You think about big plants and workers and vending metals and all that stuff. If you focus on those sorts of industries, you get the blue line, where output has been much slower. And you can see that over the last 25 years or so, you've seen this divergence. So that's one way you see that there's two different manufacturing sectors. And the other way you see it is if you drill down into those blue lines, you kind of say, okay, who's benefiting from this output growth? And you split that by the size of the company, you get this chart, where the orange line is the largest companies. So these are with assets of over $1 billion, which amounts to roughly what annual sales of 5 to 6 billion, right? So those are large companies, and you can see their output growth, and you can see everybody else, right? Mostly the small and mid-sized firms, mostly in the domestic supply chain. And so the three blue lines here are basically the different sizes of those firms. Essentially, you're talking about smaller firms, mid-sized companies, not necessarily mom and pop shops, but pretty decent firms. But those firms as a group have seen negative revenue growth for 20 years, right? And that is still going on. So I want just to, yes?
And this reflects the same chart from before, just split into three?
This reflects the same.
It's a different cut. This is not by industry, but rather by size of company.
Okay.
The previous chart was looking at figures in pharma versus everything else. This is by the size of the companies.
And one thing I'll just add on this chart, I think, is really dangerous two ways. One of course, is that you see the decline of the kind of viability and success of small and medium-sized manufacturing businesses, which of course account for a lot of the employment, et cetera. But secondly, the large firms, the orange line, rely on smaller firms as their supply base. And so value chains are getting much more global and much more complex because the orange guys are not sourcing from American small and medium-sized businesses, they're sourcing from overseas. And so you see this hollowing out of the US supply chain, and that's dangerous for a couple of reasons. Not that there's anything wrong with global trade, that actually adds value to the orange firms, but over time they become less and less able to find the kind of suppliers they need. And as we're going to talk later about the importance of upgrading capital infrastructure and capabilities particularly around digital and analytics and modern manufacturing technologies. And if you don't have a supply base that allows you to do that, you have to go and search for that supply base. So there's a real danger that the orange firms will not be viable in the United States over the long term structurally because of the lack of a local supply base. And there's also real security issues if you look at how that plays out, for example, in aerospace and defense in terms of whether there's a viable supply base to support American manufacturing as would be important from a security perspective.
And one quick item on your sub-bullet number 1 using PPI. Wouldn't it actually be even more deflated if you used CPI and then also normalized it by dollar growth at the same time as compared to a whole? Because, I mean, if you look at 90, we were, the fiat currency, and now with a slight diversification in that, but also adjusted for CPI, I think it would actually fare worse for some of the smaller firms.
It would fare worse for smaller firms if you use CPI.
Yeah, right. I mean, for
question.
an international billion plus is not even fair.
Yes, but the reason we're going with, we actually think PPI is probably a better metric because if you're trying to understand what is happening with output growth within the firms, and then you're indexing that to things like their investment behavior or their wages that they offer to their workers, it's better to use the PPI index because that's how these firms are thinking about the prices that they can command in the market and therefore what do they see in terms of nominal price growth versus real price growth, right? So I think we can use CPI, and you're right, it's going to look worse. It's a little bit harder though to tell the story because then you get into these arguments about what's CPI.
Yeah, and what percent of the market made up at what time?
Exactly. Right? So you'd rather use PPI that is specific to the industry, and you kind of coalesce all that into this chart, and that's a little harder to argue. Yes.
Has your data shown any kind of consolidation of the supply chains in these SMEs by the major companies in the orange?
You see a loss of firms in the supply chain. What you do see is about 40% of firms, if you compare to 20 years ago, there are 40% fewer firms today in supply chain. Now, whether that's because these firms have died or because they've just consolidated is hard to tell.
Have any of the orange firms bought their supply chain partners? Has there been any kind of down market acquisition?
There has been some kind of re-verticalization of the industry, but there are also some sectors which are de-verticalizing and actually trying to outsource more. So there's quite a lot of puts and takes. I don't think there's any one industry trend, but we see more companies trying to become asset light and think about creating specialization of manufacturing capability and others. And I think that the digital Industry 4.0, all of that is going to accelerate that, and it already is accelerating. It will continue to accelerate it for 2 reasons. One is that you end up with even more specialized capability that some legacy companies have not built, and therefore, rather than investing in new capital, new capabilities, they look for external manufacturers who can specialize in automation in a way that they don't see themselves as becoming cutting edge at. So basically the whole definition of what's a core capability versus not changes, and you end up looking externally. And then second, one of the benefits, of course, of the digital thread, if you will, the connection point digitally across supply chain is that you actually can coordinate your production and your value chains much more easily across multiple different companies and multiple different geographies. So both of those are forces that will tip the scales towards less verticalization. There are some subsectors where companies are PE firms or individual companies are doing roll-ups of small subscale suppliers in order to create more viable larger companies. So that is happening in some sectors as well.
One thing I would say though is this kind of a bifurcation by the size of the firms, you don't see this in other sectors. Having said that, yes, the 20 years we have seen a boom in M&A activity, right? So what is has happened. We have not seen a spike in M&A activity in these industries. So there's nothing to suggest that there's a whole lot more M&A going on in these industries, in manufacturing industries compared to the average, but there's certainly a lot more going on in some of the more intangible intensive, technology, pharma. There's a lot more going on there compared to these sectors. So,
There's a question over here.
yes.
Do you know what order things went in? Did the small businesses close because the large firms outsourced their chain, or did the outsourcing happen because the small business closed? Because that could, direct.
Yes, we can, usually, so we can tell the story. We can tell the story in specific industries. So let me see if I can jump to that a little bit. All right, so this is an example of the automotive industry, all right, where starting in the late 90s, you had depreciation of the currency, and a whole lot of more global competition that came along. It starts to put pressure on some of the larger firms who start to lose market shares. If you look at some of the market shares in the big three and big five in the US auto industry, you see a decline, right? What happens in those cases? You start to see firms, in some cases, passing on those sorts of pressures into the supply chain. And so you see, if you look at things like the working capital inventory within the supply chain, it starts to increase, right? You see that supply chain partners are, their ability to pass on price increases into higher stages of the value chain goes down. So you see a big commodity boom, right? Metal prices go up. If you're a metal manufacturing firm, you're kind of stuck between higher commodity prices on the one hand and buyers that you cannot pass those price increases on to. You start to feel the pressure and you start to die, right? So typically what has happened is that it's sort of a cycle, but it usually starts with the firms feeling pressure from various places. It doesn't have to be from the larger firms, it could be from various other places. And they start to die, and that starts to create a cycle. Okay? So, and you can see that decline of the domestic supply chain across a whole bunch of industries. So this is a chart that shows you 2000 versus 2015, for which we had the most recent data. And the blue tells you how much of US consumption of these different industries is produced domestically, right? And so you can see that in just about everyone, so if you look at basic consumer goods, this is your apparel and your shoes are in there. Technology-driven products is, this is sort of your electronics and pharmaceuticals in there. Vehicles, heavy machinery, all your industrials, all the automobiles are in there. And then locally processed goods is things like food and beverage, rubbers and plastics, right, fabricated metal components, those sorts of things are in there. And you can see that across the board, except for the resource-intensive commodities that benefited from the shale boom, you can see a decline in the participation of the US supply chain in whatever demand growth there has been in the US. So that is also reflected then, well, the inputs have to come from somewhere, right? They're not coming from domestically, they're coming from overseas. And so you can see a bunch of squiggly lines on the space. This is the trade deficit in advanced industries in the US, right? And so you can ignore all the squiggly lines except for the orange one at the bottom, which is the aggregate US trade deficit in advanced industries, right? So we're not talking about shoes and clothing and those sorts of products. We're talking about advanced industries where the US is supposed to have a competitive advantage according to the theory of trade. And the US and the UK are the only two economies that have a trade deficit in these industries.
Yeah, this is another thing that I think one should take away as alarming. So the first alarming thing is how large the small, medium-sized enterprises in the U.S. This is the other one. So one of the things we did in some of our previous research was to look at all the different parts of the manufacturing sector and really understand what drives decisions about where do you locate your manufacturing for each one of those, right, globally. And there's actually a very small portion of the manufacturing sector that's driven by labor cost arbitrage, where you find the lowest cost labor, right? So shoes, toys, clothing, and it's actually quite a small portion of the total sector. And so the US has long been non-competitive in that, and certainly if you look at the loss of manufacturing employment in those subsectors, you see that to be the most dramatic. But the disturbing thing, I think, is not should we be chasing after the next generation of clothing manufacturers, but rather this chart, which is that if you look at these industries, the decision about where to locate is not about where do you find the lowest labor cost. The decision is about where do you actually find the best technology, the best capabilities in your workforce, et cetera. This shows that the U.S. is really slipping in its competitiveness in the place that the U.S. should be strongest, and which is most strategically important for us in a whole different set of dimensions.
So how do you define all industries? Is it would it make sense to be the superset of the things that
Yes.
it is the superset?
98 competency.
Most of those are declining, so when you add up all their declines, that's what.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So with the exception of aerospace,
Mhm.
you see we have
So-
all others.
Is the baseline still labor and non-skilled essentially labor for these industries? Is that?
No, it's capital, it's capital investment in upgrading technology. It's the connection to advanced research and being able to commercialize new capabilities, and then, yes, the workforce in terms of the skill set that you can find.
Yes. Sorry?
She
Joe, you
asked
have
the question.
Yeah, so anything you add to that?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think, you know, I'm trying to figure out if I should get just a wee bit wonky here. Not that I haven't been wonky yet. And you know,
There might be one or two people who appreciate it. Go ahead.
So one of the things that people often push back on is to say, well, this is a trade deficit. It's just looking at exports minus imports. You should look at the value-added trade deficit. Right? So they use the example of the iPhone, which would be considered an import on this chart, right? And they say, well, most of the value of the iPhone actually comes from the US, right? So you can't take the entire $1,000 iPhone 10 and count it as a US import because 80% of the value is in the US. So you only take 20% and count it as an import, right? And so when people kind of take that argument and they extrapolate that and say, well, therefore the trade deficit is actually not as bad as it looks because a lot of the value is still here. And when we do the analysis, what you find is that the computers and semiconductors lines do start to look a little bit better, but all the other lines look a lot worse. And so the actual trade deficit in value-added terms looks worse than it is in this page. Because for every iPhone that comes in with a lot of US content, there's a US car, you know, a Volkswagen or a BMW, whatever, not to call out specific names, that is exported from the US with not much US domestic content, right? Which now counts as a US export, but you have to adjust that down too, right? And so you end up doing all these things just so folks know the trade deficit is actually pretty bad.
And one chart, I don't know if you want to show this chart, but just this gets to your question a little bit about capability.
Yeah.
I mean, there are different dimensions of how mature or how advanced different countries' manufacturing sectors are. I think the left-hand side of this chart is one of many indicators that would show that U.S. Manufacturing is lagging other countries in terms of investment in cutting-edge manufacturing innovation.
Yeah.
So you see, you know, this is industrial robotics usage, but there are other metrics like this that you can come up with to look at the adoption of latest manufacturing capability. And this is about both the capital investment, it's about the redesign of the workflow and workflow processes, and yes, the reskilling of workers who can manage these new processes.
And I often bring this chart out when I hear that automation destroyed U.S. manufacturing jobs. I say, well, actually, that's not true. Automation did not destroy it, right? It was the loss of output that destroyed it. We talked a little bit about the impact of the declining supply chain on things like innovation and the large firms, right? 70% of the U.S. manufacturing workforce is in the supply chain. And so when the firms do badly, you end up with workers who do badly, right? So for those workers who are still employed, this is a chart that shows you wage growth in the different sectors of the US economy. And you can see that things like finance and healthcare are doing really well. Manufacturing is sort of middling. And if you decompose manufacturing into the different types of manufacturing industry, you see that the vast majority, about 50 to 60% of all employment, is in the lines that are, actually more than 60 to 65, is below the gray line that says total manufacturing. So if you are a production worker in vehicles or in chemicals, or in food and rubber and plastics, you are basically not seeing wage growth in 30 years. Right? So if people complain that our manufacturing sector is not attracting the best and brightest, it's not just because they think the jobs are dark and dangerous. Right? It's because the market is operating the way it should. There is no wage growth, there's no career prospects, and so people won't come. And so that pressure on the workers' wages translates to what's going on in the economy overall. So one of the big stories in the US economy is the fact that labor doesn't make up as much of US national income as it used to. Right? right? And you can see that on this page on the left. And you can see on the right the contribution of manufacturing to that decline in labor share, which is pretty striking. It's a striking thing to say that the decline of manufacturing and supply chains makes up 70% of the decline in workers' share of income. Right? It's a striking thing to say that because the direct manufacturing employment in the US economy is only about 10%. It's actually less than 10%, it's about 9%. Okay? But it's just that those jobs used to pay so well and now pay so little that as the employment share has fallen, the wage share has fallen even faster. And so the aggregate effect is very, very high.
And of course, this is what we're seeing, right, in that the return to capital and therefore capital owners has just increased, and the return to labor has decreased. And of course, that's, something that's very visible politically for us these days.
Right. And then the other dimension to this is the geographic dimension, because one of the other challenges that we have is the sectors where you have seen wage growth. So for instance, if you go back to this page, sectors like finance or information, if you look at their geographic spread, right, so both their direct effect and their multiplicative effect, their geographic spread is extremely narrow. Compared to a sector like manufacturing, which is a very wide spread, which means that those declines, as we can, this is sort of evidence to back up what we already know, right, is that you have a widespread decline geographically, which then translates to sort of a knock-on effect within those communities of a lack of investment, and you kind of create a cycle there. Okay, so that was the depressing part. Yes, it is worse from
I
here.
wonder if y'all have any tidbits on the decline of organized labor that fit into this decline in overall
Yeah,
share.
I think the question is, so it gets back to that question of which came first, right? Is it a chicken or egg? And what you see is, as firms start to feel the pressure, right, they're going to start to look for ways to alleviate the pressure, right? Any firm is going to try to do that. If you are a manufacturing firm and you are seeing a headwind in terms of your exchange rate or your tax rate and you're losing market share, you're going to try to do what you can to sustain the return on capital. The way you sustain return on capital is by trying to cut your costs to preserve your profit margin, right? If you're a manufacturing firm, the two largest sources of cost that you have are your materials, hence the supply chain, and your labor, right? Now the question is, did the decline of unionization happen orthogonally? Was it part of that? Did these firms all somehow gang up? They didn't gang up. But you kind of saw these, there were opportunities to kind of take, not advantage, but kind of, use those sorts of patterns where you saw a migration of work from the northern states to the southern states, right, where the regulatory rules are different. All of that is part of this mix. It's very hard to say though, and this is why in this analysis we did not do a chart that says the decline of unionization contributed 10% and the role of trade is 20%, because it doesn't make sense to think of it like that. These are not independent things that you can call out separately. They all work in a cycle and they kind of put pressure on each other. Right? But at the end of the day, it comes down to the health of the firms themselves. And if the firms are doing fine, then you will not see these issues. If the firms are not doing fine, for whatever reason, you will see all of these issues take place. All right, so we want to talk a little bit about why we did this research, and basically, we actually do see some tailwinds. Right? Now, some of those tailwinds are coming from what's happening in the global manufacturing sector, where there are 2 or 3 things going on. One is some pretty sustained demand growth, both in the domestic market and the foreign markets. We are seeing new consumers joining. You are seeing a change in the consumer mindset. We're looking for shorter cycles, faster time to market, more product variants. There's sort of a trend of moving away from selling a product to selling a service based off of that product. Right? So there's new opportunities that are coming up, many of which require proximity to the market, which means that if you are trying to sell into the US market, there's sort of a tailwind that says you probably want to have some presence in the US market, which is a good thing for US-based producers, right? That's one. There's a second thing that's happening where you are starting to see some pretty significant opportunities to become more productive all along the value chain, right? And so there's still significant opportunities in terms of lean operations. There are opportunities coming from technology and data insights, right? Katie talked a little bit about this notion of the digital value thread. And there are some manufacturing firms are now figuring it out. Right? So it used to be a technical challenge. It's moved from being a technical challenge to sort of an organizational challenge. How do I string the whole organization together? And now that a few firms have figured it out, you can expect to see a wave of diffusion. We're starting to see some of that. And that, we hope is actually going to drive a wave of productivity. Just like 20 years ago, the mobile platform revolution triggered a wave of productivity among firms. We might start to see some of that happening now. And then linked to that, of course, is the fact that there's a significant digital opportunity within manufacturing and supply chains where the US can use its technical prowess, right? And we hope that there's opportunities there to take what we do on the technological supply side in the US and link that to our manufacturing sector.
Yeah. Manufacturing has by far the largest amount of data of any sector in the world. The second is government, by the way, and then third is banking, and then only then do you get to the consumer goods kind of retail sector, which of course has been revolutionized through the use of data, right, and through the use of through online business models. So if you think about the disruption and the opportunity that can happen in manufacturing by actually harnessing that data to improve productivity, to improve flexibility, and also to create, through the Internet of Things, really an industrial internet in terms of completely new business models in terms of buying and selling capacity, creating the opportunity to access expertise in communities of practice all around the world. All of that's very exciting. Most of our clients see that opportunity. It's much harder to figure out how to get from here to there. But it will come at some point, and it will be something that really revolutionizes, and we want to make sure that the U.S. is on the right side of that revolution.
Yes.
If I may plug a domestic case for McKinsey on this, Barrick Gold Corporation in Nevada did that. I actually was in charge of the digital transformation for Barrick.
Oh, that's great.
But McKinsey was.
I was wondering, did you work with us? They're a great example of. It's really interesting. I do most of my work. I'm from New Jersey in pharmaceuticals, and they consider themselves far more sophisticated than the mining industry, which is digging in the dirt, and pharmaceuticals is, sterile rooms to make, the latest biopharmaceuticals. And we actually brought them some of the case examples from mining, which has, I think, been one of the most exciting industries in terms of really revolutionizing the way they're working with digital. So I haven't been to Barrick, but if you go to one of the mines in Australia, they'll have these control rooms where, what's very exciting is they have people located, co-located in these, cube kind of desks, etc., with the name of each of their mines on top of kind of each pod, and then there's a little pod for the rail system and there's a pod for the port. And these people are actually taking advantage of both advanced analytics and kind of digital capability and co-location. So it's this really interesting combination of creating more co-location for human interaction than they used to have, which is powered by the fact that they have digital connection to the actual sites. And so they're working autonomous vehicles in the sites. They are doing real-time production planning. When rail breaks down in one part of their whole systems, they replan everything like that using advanced analytics algorithms, etc. They can actually very quickly identify changes in ore quality that will have pricing implications and kind of replan the whole thing. So this is probably familiar to you. But it's very exciting because they're actually looking at not just a use case for how do we improve the preventative maintenance of this piece of equipment, which everybody has figured out how to do, and we'll get better and better, but that's easy. They actually are looking at how do we actually think about threading together the whole value chain in a completely different way. And so when my pharma clients saw that, they actually ended up being embarrassed. One of them even said, I can't believe this. These guys, are looking at the value chain end to end, and we actually just had, every single one of our production disruptions last year was because their supply base wasn't delivering, and we had no visibility to it, and yet these guys have that visibility. So it's a really, I think what mining is doing is super exciting, and it paves the way for what you could imagine. And again, technically, it's all possible right now. There's nothing, and the amount of productivity gain that you could achieve through the application of existing technologies is really amazing.
Yeah,
It's
well,
all about
just
organizational
utilizing
change.
it, right?
But it is the tailwind. The fact that a few firms have figured this out, right? it is leading other firms to start to do it themselves, and they run into this issue of, oh my God, my supply chain has been seeing negative growth for 20 years. You can kind of imagine what happens to supply chain in that sense in terms of this technology readiness or its investment. It's just not there, right?
Yeah.
And so you're starting to see these conversations going on about how do you, what is the role of these firms in making sure the supply chain is revitalized. So those sorts of tailwinds is what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
And if you capture those, I think what we're seeing is, this is a one-sizing estimate, there's many others out there. But what we think realistically is, you're not going to get back millions and millions of jobs, right? This is not like the 50s again, as much as we would like it. Some of us do, some of us don't. But we're looking at about 2 million or so jobs that you could create across a range of industries. But it's important, I think, to also think about the role of manufacturing beyond just its role as a job creator. Because really what it does is it drives investment and productivity. And it drives investment and productivity across a wide geographic swath. And there is no other sector in the economy, in any advanced economy, that has that role, that combination of investment and productivity in the wide swath, other than kind of a big public works infrastructure project. It's hard to imagine a sector having that kind of impact. And that's really what we should be aiming for, right? And that combined with the R&D, the incredible amount of R&D that goes on in this industry, right? And so that's really what we should be thinking about as you think about what a robust manufacturing sector looks like, right? It does not look like millions and millions of workers trudging into a factory every morning. What it looks like is a massive engine of investment, productivity, and R&D across a huge geographic swath, much more than we have today. That's the vision of manufacturing that we like to see.
Yeah.
But
And I
to
guess, just to call out, everybody's got their favorite number on this page. My favorite number is the 35% productivity growth, because that's what drives our standard of living. So if you combine the fact that manufacturing is disproportionately driving productivity growth and our standard of living as a society, and also, as we saw before, disproportionately driving the change in return to labor versus return to capital, this is where societal impact, that's where manufacturing has such an outsized impact on kind of how we feel as a society.
So to get there, this is not going to be easy, right? So yeah, there was a brief moment of optimism, and I'm going to get depressing again. No, I think what we need, we have to figure out how we get capital upgrades into the supply chain, right? So this is a chart that shows you what has happened to the age of equipment and structures in the supply chain of those advanced industries where you saw that massive trade deficit happen, right? And as you would expect, as those firms are not seeing growth, they're not making investments, the capital is aging. If you look at this picture for Germany or Japan, you would see it very differently, right? And so you're seeing kind of this increase in the age of these critical suppliers to some of the industries where we know we want to maintain a technological edge, right? Aerospace, defense, automobiles, machinery. And so that's something we have to address.
By the way, that page is why, given that this is a congressional group, why some of our clients are very keen to look at how do you actually think about tax incentives for investing in existing capital versus tax incentives for investing in new capital, because this, basically they have to retool old assets, and that's absolutely critical but it's not easy to do. Yeah.
One of the downstream effects here too is if you look at U.S. energy infrastructure, specifically like high voltage transformers.
Yeah.
The average transformer has a maximum lifespan of 50 years, and the average transformer in the U.S. right now is about 48 and a half, which is pretty horrible. And there's what's known as depending on your level of pessimism, the 7 or 9 transformer, the substation rule, where if 7 transformer substations in the U.S. were to go out, U.S. infrastructure would be crippled for a year and a half, because we don't have enough domestic manufacturers of actual transformers. In other words, to keep the U.S. running, you'd have to literally cut off a part of the U.S. by removing the transformer and moving it to a different substation. And this was shown in like the Metcalf incident in California, where one substation went off, and that caused enough of an issue.
And you guys thought I was being depressed.
Yeah.
Yes, you had a question?
Do we know for certain that the capital upgrades aren't happening as a result of tax incentives and whatnot, as opposed to they're not happening because they're responding to the depressed manufacturing market and people just don't have the capital.
Yeah, I didn't want me to draw a direct causation to the tax thing, but when you hear companies talk about the importance of upgrading existing capital, that's where it comes from. In terms of causation, again, I think it's one of these systems effects, but
Yeah, but when you survey the small and mid-sized firms, and NIST has done this too, right? We've seen the MVP surveys, and we did a few of them, working with some of the folks in NIST as well. What they'll tell you is a quarter of them don't have capital to even meet their inventories.
right.
Right? They're not even thinking about these sorts of capital upgrades. This is, and forget about Industry 4.0 and how do I get export growth capital. Forget that. This is just basic survival capital is not there, right? And so yes, there is. It may not be the only factor, but the fact that there is this pressure on these firms, which in turn is linked to the fact that they're not seeing growth opportunities, right? They haven't seen growth opportunities in 20 years, is definitely part of the issue. And a few years ago, one of the big debates that we had, the big macroeconomic debates, was why aren't companies making investments when interest rates are so low and it's all this incentive? This is why. They're not seeing the demand. If you weren't seeing the demand, you wouldn't make the investments. Many of these firms happen to be in communities or places where local financing channels have dried up. And so even if you're able to make a case, there's nobody there. There's no kind of financing partner who can help you get this kind of financing, because honestly, it's not easy to do these sorts of capital upgrades. There are risks involved. It's easy to go to a bank and say, I have 1,000 orders for widgets. I need to build a production line. Help me build a production line so I can make that. That's easy for a bank to do. It's harder for a bank to say, to respond to something like this, saying, I don't know if I'm going to have demand, but I need to make these productivity upgrades, because without that, there's no way I'm going to get the demand. That's a much harder thing for the financing system to provide capital for. Yes?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question earlier about what was the impact of the financial downturn in the late 2000s, and how has that impacted, obviously, access to capital? And you used the example of the auto industry, a perfect example, and obviously we know what happened with the big three, but it was all the suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
But when the big three went through their issues, and I guess 2 out of 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when they went through, and you talk about these smaller manufacturers that went out of business, and all the suppliers and everything like that, they were all crippled by the impact of that. Do you see it, or have we recovered from that fully, or?
So typically what happens if you go back to the last 3 recessions, right, going back to the early 90s, what we've seen at the macroeconomic level is recoveries that used to be V-shaped, right? So you have a deep decline and then you bounce back, have become U-shaped, right? And when you drill that down into the large firms versus the small firms, there what you see is, if you're a large firm, you do see a V-shaped recovery, right? So you see a demand falling and it comes back up again. If you're a small firm, you tend to die. So you go down and you don't come back. And in fact, you actually see the same trend. If you saw that chart, this is kind of what you see, right? So you see the V-shaped recoveries for the larger firms, and every time there's a downturn, a bunch of smaller firms die, they don't come back. And so the supply chain settles at a lower level, right? And that's what's driving this U-shaped recovery that you see. So it takes longer and longer for jobs or growth or investment to come back, because a big chunk of your growth engine just died in every recession. That has not changed.
But obviously, the larger firms need the supply chain to come back. So is that suggesting then that their supplies are now coming from outside of the country?
That's why the trade deficit. Yes.
Can you contrast what successful countries are doing in this realm? Maybe not so much Asian countries that are relatively new and have newer machinery by nature of their growing economies, but the European countries that are successfully overcoming these market forces had a recession just like us, probably larger than ours.
Yep.
Can you discuss saying or nurturing countries that aren't experiencing the trade deficits that we are?
Germany.
Yeah. I mean, the big ones you would expect are, we tend not to focus on countries like Spain because their manufacturing sector is not as diverse. If you look at Japan, Korea, Germany, right, those sorts of countries. The interesting thing is, most of them, you look at the incentives or the supports that they provide, is some version of what we provide here. Right? This is a chart that shows you, these are US initiatives. Right? So, whether it's, infrastructure and best practice learning, or, a little bit of tax incentives, capital upgrades, workforce support, right, workforce training kind of stuff, export promotion. We do all of those things, right? We already do them. One issue, I think at least, and Katy, you should jump into this issue as well, is the fragmentation of the initiatives that we have. So we tend to devolve these initiatives to the state or local level, where they tend to be relatively short-term, relatively small scale, just given where we develop it, right? So this is an example, mid-Atlantic states. So this is a belt starting in New York and ending in Maryland, Virginia, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Ohio. And you look at the incentives that they provided to manufacturing, right? All the trends I showed you, by the way, for the US, the mid-Atlantic looks worse, right? While it looks worse, and that little recovery that we saw in the US in the last 7 years did not happen in the mid-Atlantic, right? In those 7 years, we have spent $7 billion in the mid-Atlantic states, right? 1,700 different programs. So we do all of them. We do all, any example that you come up with from Japan or Germany, you will find a similar example here, right? The problem is, if you want to upgrade our capital asset base to make it technology ready, you're going to have to find $115 million a year for the next 10 years. If you want to create a workforce development program the way Germany has, equivalent to our manufacturing workforce, you're going to have to find $40 million a year, right? And
Are they just simply allocating the funds and they're not?
yes.
Well, and part of that, may I point out too, as a congressional audience here, it's due to a lack of oversight in Congress for having long-term goals. If we look at the effect of sequester, for instance, and now continuing resolutions for budgets, these are, forgive my language, but piss-poor ways to invest in infrastructure. If you want something, you need to plan it out at a 5, 10, 15, 20-year rate, which Europe has done very effectively. The United States has done a very poor job of doing anything for more than a year, 2 years. And simply put, a large corporation like GE is not going to invest $5 billion in some capital assets program or do something like that if they don't know that there's going to be continuing work for them. So I mean, and we've just done a horrible job compared to that.
And there's all sorts of studies out there. There are studies that we have done, other think tanks in DC have done, that look at the amount of funding that goes into these manufacturing support programs as a share of GDP, and they're all doing the same thing. I mean, the Japanese spend 30 times as much as we do. The Germans spend 25 times as much as we do, right? It's not that we don't have the services, and it's not like the services don't work. They do work. We have many case examples showing that the US these things work. But as you're saying, this is a sector that does not respond, unfortunately, to near-term small scale, right? Because the firms, the capital upgrade, the capital investments that you need upfront, the time that it takes for a firm to learn from those capital investments and see an improvement in productivity, right? Or the ability to crack a new export market and start seeing growth in scale, those things take time. And so if you offer a company, and we heard this from Ayurveda, if you offer a firm an incentive for a couple $100,000 a year, and you can say, look, it's going to be here for the first year, I don't know what next year. It's not going to look, man, I have to worry about my working capital, right? I'm not going to take this investment and then be left out in 2 years, so I'm not going to do it. Right? So you start to see these sorts of issues that somehow we have to figure out how we address. Did you do that?
No, I totally agree.
I would say one element that's brought some dynamism to that is what we've seen in the private equity markets, particularly in the lower middle market end of it, where you've got relatively patient capital with a long horizon and also kind of additional capabilities that they can bring to these industrial companies to help them kind of drive improvement in their productivity and also give them kind of the capital assets that they need when they can make a justifiable business case. And these are investors who typically buy and hold a company for 5 to 7 years. They want to see growth, but there still needs to be enough juice left for the next owner to come in and say, okay, I see a path here. I realize where this is going. I see that the investments are paying off. I'm comfortable taking ownership from the current owner and continue to invest in this growth and bringing it forward. So I think that the private sector has actually been doing a lot, through the capital markets to help drive and enable this growth.
Yeah, I think this idea of long-term capital, this is one of those underrated stories in the case of Germany and Japan. So in Germany, you hear all about Mittelstand and the world beating small firms with export engines and the apprentice program. You never hear about KFW, which is a development bank that was set up in the 1940s and still sitting out there channeling long-term funds into this industry, right? In Japan, you never hear about Japan Finance Corporation. Same thing, it plays the same role, right? You don't hear about those kinds of cases. I'm not sure why, but certainly there's no US national equivalent of that sort of entity. And one thing I would add from this, these are some of the things that you see. This idea of capability building within the supply ecosystem, right? This takes many different forms. So part of it is technology upgrades, export promotion. Part of it is just basic leadership support. How do you create a pitch book to go get funding from a bank? How do you create a business plan for your products, right? I used to sell into defense supply chain. I lost that contract. How do I now sell into aerospace, commercial aerospace? What do I need to retool, right? Or I used to sell into Kazakhstan. Those guys found a new supplier. How do I convert to Tunisia, right? What does the market look like? What are the customs requirements? That sort of business mindset, right? So when you talk about capability building or workforce training in these firms, we're not just talking about welders or designers or CNC machine controllers. We're not just talking about those folks, although we're talking about those guys too. Right? It's the guys who know how to do lean operations on a plant. They know how to improve the effectiveness of a piece of equipment. Right? It's the guys who know how to go to a bank, how to go to financing arms, how to deal with regulation, how to deal with export markets. That's the kind of scalability as well. All right. So that's our research. As I said, the reports are here. We can certainly send you links if you don't want to run these home. And we have many more of these that come in. But this is sort of a flavor of what we do in terms of economic data and combined with the firm level insights.
I'd say, oh, go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah, I was going to just say, we're trying to paint this as both the case for action and change, right? But also, I do think one of the things I just wanted to reemphasize, because I'm not sure if we brought it to life enough, the Barrett Gold example, which is US example, but also many others, there is a real, we are on the cusp of a complete reinvention of this sector in a way that will be enormously exciting to us as consumers, right? So think about mass customization and distributed manufacturing. What will we be buying at Walmart that's actually manufactured at Walmart? Where will our medical devices will be manufactured at our hospitals? The medical equipment that our surgeons use will be manufactured for them and custom at the hospital, right? There's a world where you can imagine vast parts of the manufacturing sector really getting reinvented into completely new business models, and we might not even call it the manufacturing sector anymore because it's going to be totally interlinked with services and with what we currently think about as consumer products or industrial products that at the user level. So there's, for me, the excitement about the future is that this is at the cusp of reinvention in a really radical way, and we just need to make sure that we're positioning our workforce and our capital in a way to fully take advantage of that.
This is why we do this together, by the way. She knows about the exciting stuff. And I can get a house on fire.
And one other note, Dr.
Yeah.
George, you wrote a very interesting piece, Reshoring. Could you
Yes.
give me a title for people? And by the way, I'm not a McKinsey person. So I'm not like trying to no, I'm not a plant, but no, I enjoyed that. And
That was a good
relevant.
idea. Next time, we'll sure we have.
But what was the full title for some of the
It's
people?
called Next Shoring.
Next.
And the reason, that title really never caught on, but I love the fact that you remember this. What happened? 2014, I was going to ask when that was. There was this, right when we were seeing the upsurge in manufacturing recovery, there was a lot of conversation and a lot of excitement about the notion of reshoring, if you remember, this notion of, people finally figured out that actually if you look at total delivered cost, it's much better to manufacture here. And in fact, that wasn't actually true. What was really happening was that this is when we did the analysis of the 6 different segments of the manufacturing sector and found that actually a huge portion is driven by local demand. And so the automotive sector is one, as you saw, even though we're losing domestic content, manufacturing assembly for automotive is still here. And so what we saw was demand recovery driving for increased investment and success of different parts of the manufacturing sector, driven mostly by automotive. So the notion of nearshoring was, this is not about bringing things back to the United States, that's just not it is about thinking about what's the best place for production in the new world, both based on where consumption's happening and what the economic drivers of that are, and also where there is technology, know-how, and capability that will attract manufacturing investment. So thank you for bringing that up.
We see that, in 2015 or so, the job growth just completely went away. And that was a combination of the demand boom peaking and the drop in the oil prices related to oil fracking activity coming to an end.
Yep.
And so now as you see increase the fracking activity coming back, you're starting to see a little bit more job growth.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's the thought with 5G? We've heard over and over again that's the ability to expand the Internet of Things is going to reinvent everything.
Right.
Is there any concern that if the U.S. is outpaced, that could exacerbate the issue of manufacturing kind of declining here and expanding elsewhere?
Yeah, no, there's a huge concern about that, because I think there are a couple of different issues at work. So part of the Internet of Things will actually mean that, sensors that are on, stuff we use is going to, be somehow drive manufacturing activity and changes, and design changes and all of that in a way that will support localization. So that's a good thing for us. But part of what will happen is that there will be an increased demand for manufacturers who know how to use all of that capability. And so only if we invest to get ahead of that will we actually be able to take advantage of that. Because the other counter, as I said, is digitization means that it's easier to run very complicated global supply chains. So, and what we're seeing in outsourcing versus in-sourcing is kind of much more complicated, nuanced story than in the past, which is it's not about, nobody in these advanced industries today would do outsourcing based on just labor arbitrage. This is not happening. What is happening is where do we get very deep capability around this, and let's put that piece of it where we get that capability. And we can string these specialized capabilities together in a much more complicated way than we ever did, because we can have mining guys come in and tell us how to do a control tower that puts it all together.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a counterbalancing piece, but I think there's a big chunk of the sector there's a piece of particularly consumer goods and things that will be driven by customization that could have a positive impact for us. The piece that's more driven by technology capability, it'll go either way based on whether we've made the investments and really tip the scales in terms of our leading capabilities versus other places where people could make investments.
And along those same lines, there's obviously a lot of concern in rural areas where broadband isn't available currently, let alone 5G.
Yeah.
And manufacturing is just as important in those areas. So what's the discussion as to how to kind of derive that?
Yeah, no, infrastructure is critical to it.
I think this is where, there is not much of a conversation, but at least an initial discussion of what is the role of public agencies in expanding that 5G access. Because the issue is, this is where the US is different from Japan, right? Where the manufacturing supply chain, the density, the geographic density is much lower.
Right.
And so if you leave it just to the private market to roll out 5G, it's going to get to many of these places eventually.
Right.
But from a company's perspective, you're going to create a digital value chain.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of want, that chain is going to be as strong as its weakest link.
Sure.
And so that is a concern that we're seeing.
And Bill Gates is literally in town today or tomorrow afternoon talking about Microsoft Airwave with the rural 5G. Or, well, not 5G, but rural spectrum. So,
Yeah, and ENC is having a Roy Bombs Act hearing right now. So it's definitely being discussed, but a lot of curiosity from businesses specifically.
Great. Well, we're happy to stay a few minutes late, but I know you guys are on to your next thing. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Before everyone leaves, let me just take a minute to announce the Manufacturing Caucus will be having another event tomorrow. Usually we don't do two in 1 week, but it's on robotics in the workforce, so if you're interested, and you don't have the flyer